I met Patrick at my father's architecture conference 3.5 years ago, right after I'd graduated nursing school. I was 25, finally had my life together, and felt like I could conquer the world. Dad introduced us during one of those boring cocktail mixers. And honestly, Patrick wasn't my usual type. He was quiet, serious, wore these perfectly pressed shirts that screamed responsible adult. But there was something about the way he listened when I talked, really listened, that made me feel like I was the only person in the room. He asked for my number that night, and when he called 2 days later to ask me to dinner, he already had reservations at this little Italian place I'd mentioned loving. That's when I knew he was different. Most guys I'd dated could barely remember my last name, but Patrick remembered details. He opened car doors, sent flowers to my apartment just because it was Tuesday, planned these perfect weekend getaways to little bed and breakfasts in wine country. For that entire year we dated, I felt like I was living in some romantic movie. Patrick would drive 40 minutes out of his way just to bring me coffee during my night shifts. He'd leave these sweet notes in my textbooks when I was studying for my nursing boards. When I got stressed about starting my career, he'd run me these elaborate bubble baths and just hold me while I talked about my fears. I'd never felt so cherished, so completely adored by someone. The proposal was perfect. Obviously, he took me back to that same conference center where we'd met. Had them set up this private dinner in the same ballroom where my father had first introduced us. When he got down on one knee, he said he wanted to spend the rest of his life making me feel as special as I'd made him feel that very first night. I was crying so hard I could barely say yes. We got married a few months later, and those first months of marriage were absolutely magical. Patrick would wake up early, just to make me breakfast before my shifts. We'd spend entire Sundays in bed, talking about the house we wanted to buy, the kids we'd have someday, the trips we'd take when his architecture firm really took off. I felt so secure, so confident that I'd found my person. This was it. This was the life I'd always dreamed of. But then something started to shift. Patrick began taking on more projects, staying later at the office, coming home exhausted and distracted. At first, I tried to be understanding. His firm was growing, and I knew how important his career was to him. But it started feeling like work was becoming more important than our marriage. He'd come home and immediately open his laptop, barely looking up when I tried to tell him about my day. Date nights became rare, then non-existent. Those romantic gestures that had made me fall in love with him just stopped. Then he hired Sophia as his new office administrator, and everything got worse. She was 22, gorgeous in that effortless blonde way, and suddenly Patrick had even more reasons to work late. He'd mention her constantly. Sophia reorganized the files. Sophia found this great new supplier. Sophia suggested this brilliant marketing idea. It was always Sophia that, like she was some kind of miracle worker, instead of just another pretty young thing who probably didn't know the first thing about running a business. I started noticing things. How he'd check his phone and smile at messages he wouldn't show me. How he'd shower as soon as he got home from work, like he needed to wash something off. How he'd suddenly developed this interest in going to the gym before work, wanting to look good for someone. When I'd ask about his day, he'd give me these vague, dismissive answers, but I could tell there was so much he wasn't saying. The worst part was how stupid he thought I was, like I couldn't see exactly what was happening. A beautiful young woman gets hired, and suddenly my husband can't tear himself away from the office. Please. I wasn't born yesterday. But whenever I'd bring up my concerns, Patrick would get this patronizing look on his face and tell me I was being paranoid, that Sophia was just an employee, that I was imagining things. It was so insulting, the way he'd gaslight me like that. I felt completely invisible in my own marriage. Here I was, trying to build a life with this man, and he was obviously having an emotional affair right in front of my face. Maybe it wasn't physical yet, but I could see where it was heading. The late nights, the secretive phone calls, the way he'd light up when talking about her, but barely acknowledged my presence anymore. I was living with a stranger who used to be my husband. That's when I decided to take the traveling nurse assignment 3 hours away. I told Patrick it was a great career opportunity, which it was. But honestly, I needed to get away from the suffocating feeling of being ignored and lied to every single day. Maybe some distance would make him realize what he was losing. Maybe he'd miss me enough to remember why he married me in the first place. Of course. Patrick barely seemed to notice I was gone. He helped me load my car with this distracted, almost relieved expression, like he was happy to have me out of the way. No tears, no promises to call every night. Just a quick kiss goodbye and a drive safe. It was like I was going grocery shopping instead of moving 3 hours away from our marriage. At the hospital, I threw myself into work, trying not to think about what Patrick and Sophia were probably doing with me conveniently out of the picture. That's when I met Marcus Chen, this incredibly handsome emergency room doctor who actually seemed interested in what I had to say. He'd seek me out during breaks, ask about my life, listen when I talked about feeling unappreciated at home. Marcus made me feel seen again, made me remember what it was like to have someone's full attention. When Marcus asked me out for coffee after our shift, I almost said no. I was married, after all. Even if my husband was probably too busy with his assistant to notice I'd been gone for 2 weeks. But then I thought about Patrick, about how he'd rather spend time with Sophia than his own wife. And I figured, why shouldn't I have coffee with someone who actually valued my company? That coffee turned into dinner, which turned into long conversations about how underappreciated we both felt in our lives. Marcus was going through a divorce himself, understood what it felt like to be taken for granted by someone who was supposed to love you. When he reached across the table and touched my hand, telling me how beautiful and intelligent I was, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. I felt wanted. I knew I shouldn't go back to his apartment that night, but I was so starved for affection, so tired of feeling invisible. When Marcus kissed me, it felt like coming alive again after months of feeling dead inside. When we slept together, I told myself it was just a one-time mistake, something that happened because I was lonely and my husband had basically abandoned our marriage. But even as I was driving back to my temporary housing, I couldn't bring myself to feel guilty. Patrick had made his choice when he decided work was more important than our relationship. He'd made his choice when he hired some young blonde and started staying late every night. If he cared about our marriage, he'd be fighting for it instead of letting me slip away. When Marcus texted me a few days later, asking to see me again, I didn't hesitate. Patrick probably didn't even know I was gone. He was probably too busy with Sophia to miss his wife. At least Marcus appreciated what he had. At least when I was with him, I remembered what it felt like to be desired, to be someone's priority instead of an afterthought. The second time we were together, I felt more confident about it. This wasn't some random mistake anymore. This was me finally putting myself first for once. Patrick had been emotionally cheating for months, so really, I was just evening the score. Besides, what he didn't know couldn't hurt him. And it wasn't like he was paying enough attention to figure it out anyway. Marcus and I fell into this routine over the next few weeks. He'd text me after his shifts, and I'd meet him at his place or sometimes a hotel when he wanted to be extra careful. He made me feel beautiful, desired, important. Everything Patrick used to make me feel before he got distracted by his precious career and his precious assistant. The third time we were together, Marcus told me I was incredible, that my husband was an idiot for not appreciating me. It felt so good to hear someone say what I'd been thinking for months. The fourth time, we were a little careless, a little too caught up in the moment to be as careful as we should have been. A few days later, I started feeling off. Nothing major, just some discomfort that made me think I should get checked out. When I went to the clinic and got tested, I tried not to worry. These things happen, right? People got minor infections all the time. When the results came back positive for chlamydia, I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. I called Marcus immediately, panicking, asking him what we were going to do. His response was so casual, it almost knocked me over. "Don't worry about it," he said. Like I told him I had a cold. It'll clear up with some antibiotics. These things happen. These things happen. I'd just found out I had an STI, and that was his response. No apology, no concern, just this dismissive attitude like I was overreacting to something minor. That's when it hit me that Marcus probably did this all the time, that I was just another married woman he was sleeping with while her husband worked late. But the real panic set in when I realized what this meant for Patrick. I'd have to tell him, or he'd figure it out when he started showing symptoms. There was no way around it. My affair was about to blow up our entire marriage, and suddenly all those justifications I'd been making didn't seem quite so solid. I got the antibiotics and took them immediately, hoping maybe Patrick wouldn't catch it. Maybe somehow this could stay contained. But a week after I got back from my assignment, Patrick started complaining about feeling uncomfortable. He made a doctor's appointment, and I spent those few days in absolute terror, knowing what was coming. When Patrick came home with that envelope from the doctor's office, I knew it was over. He stood in our doorway, holding those test results, and the look on his face wasn't even angry. He just looked broken, like something inside him had died. Was it worth it? He asked me, and I couldn't answer because what was I supposed to say? That yes, feeling wanted again was worth destroying our marriage. That I'd rather have an affair than talk to him about feeling neglected. When I couldn't respond, he just nodded like that, told him everything he needed to know. That's when I started talking, telling him everything, hoping maybe if I was completely honest, we could work through this. I told him about Marcus, about feeling ignored and invisible, about suspecting him of having an affair with Sophia. I explained how lonely I'd been, how much I'd needed to feel important to someone again. Patrick listened to everything without interrupting, and when I finished, He was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was so calm it scared me more than if he'd been screaming. "Jessica," he said, "I will never look at you the same way again. You ruined it." He left that night, and the next morning, I got served with divorce papers. Patrick wasn't messing around, wasn't interested in counseling or working things out. He wanted out of our marriage immediately, and he wanted everyone to know why. That's when my life really fell apart. Patrick told his parents, my parents, our friends, his colleagues, basically everyone we knew, everywhere I turned. People knew what I'd done, at the grocery store, at work, at family gatherings. I could see it in their faces. The judgment, the disappointment, the way they'd whisper when they thought I couldn't hear. My father was the worst. When I begged him to talk to Patrick, to help us work things out, he looked at me like I was a stranger. "You made your bed, Jessica," he said. "Now you have to lie in it." Even my own father was taking Patrick's side, acting like I was some kind of monster instead of a woman who'd made a mistake because she felt abandoned by her husband. I tried everything to get Patrick back. I wrote him letters explaining how sorry I was, how it had all been a terrible mistake. I showed up at his office with his favorite coffee and pastries, trying to get him to talk to me. I asked our mutual friends to intervene, to help him see that our marriage was worth saving. Nothing worked. Patrick blocked my number, blocked me on social media, refused to acknowledge my existence. During the divorce proceedings, he wouldn't even look at me. His lawyer did all the talking while Patrick sat there like I was invisible, like our entire relationship had meant nothing to him. The divorce was finalized 6 months later, and I moved away, taking traveling nurse assignments in different cities, trying to escape the reputation that seemed to follow me everywhere. But even in new places, somehow people found out. The medical community is smaller than you'd think, and word travels fast about things like this. I tried dating, thinking maybe if I could find someone new, I could move on from Patrick and prove to myself that I was still worthy of love. But it was disaster after disaster. There was Chris, this pharmacist who spent our entire first date talking about his ex-wife and how she'd ruined his life. Jason, an IT guy who seemed more interested in my salary than in me as a person. Eric, a physical therapist who knew someone and casually mentioned during dessert that he'd heard I'd cheated on my husband. I moved to North Carolina and dated this firefighter who turned out to be seeing 3 other women at the same time. In Chicago, I went out with a lawyer who seemed perfect until he ghosted me after our 3rd date for no apparent reason. Every relationship ended the same way. Either they'd find out about my past, or they'd turn out to be just as flawed as everyone else, or they'd simply lose interest and disappear. Meanwhile, through mutual friends and social media stalking I'm not proud of, I learned that Patrick was doing great. He'd started dating someone new about a year after our divorce, a kindergarten teacher named Sarah who seemed absolutely perfect for him. She was sweet, wholesome, the kind of woman who probably never had a bad thought about anyone in her life. His family loved her, his friends loved her, and from what I could see, Patrick looked happier than he'd ever been with me. That's when Marcus had the audacity to contact me again, almost 2 years after everything had fallen apart. He texted me out of nowhere, asking if I wanted to get together. Like we were old friends catching up instead of 2 people whose affair had destroyed my entire life. When I told him to leave me alone, that I never wanted to hear from him again, he actually had the nerve to text back, "You destroyed your own life." Like he hadn't been right there with me, encouraging me to cheat on my husband, telling me how incredible I was and how stupid Patrick was for not appreciating me. Suddenly it was all my fault, like he'd been some innocent bystander instead of an active participant in wrecking my marriage. I've been in therapy for over a year now, trying to understand how everything went so wrong, how I went from being a happily married woman to someone who can't maintain a relationship to save her life. My therapist keeps asking me about accountability and responsibility, but honestly, I think she doesn't understand how complicated the situation really was. It's been over 3 years since everything happened, and I still dream about Patrick sometimes. I dream about our early days together, when he used to look at me like I was the most amazing woman in the world. I wake up missing him so much it physically hurts, missing the life we had before everything got so complicated. I've stopped dating entirely now. What's the point? Either men find out about my past and judge me for one mistake, or they turn out to be disasters themselves. Sometimes I think maybe I'm not meant to find love again. Maybe what I had with Patrick was my one shot at happiness and I ruined it. The worst part is seeing how well he's doing without me. Sarah posts these pictures of them at family gatherings, on vacation, at friends' weddings, and Patrick looks so genuinely happy. He's got this peaceful, contented expression I don't remember him ever having with me, even in our best times. It's like he needed to get rid of me to become the person he was always meant to be. I know everyone thinks I'm the villain in this story, but they don't understand how lonely I was, how invisible Patrick made me feel. They don't know what it's like to watch your husband fall in love with someone else right in front of your face and then pretend like you're crazy for noticing. They don't know what it's like to be so desperate for affection that you make choices you never thought you'd make. But none of that matters now. Patrick has moved on with his perfect kindergarten teacher, and I'm still here, 3 years later, alone in whatever city I'm working in this month, wondering if I'll ever feel that happy again, wondering if I even deserve to,